Augustina Halibert. Augustina Halibert was born on March 23, 1991, in the province of Buenos Aires, Argentina. She came from a prominent family and was the eldest of three daughters of Carolina and Edgardo Halibert, with Edgardo serving as the Secretary of Health in their city. Her uncle, Herman Halibert, held the role of tourism minister and was also a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro area. Therefore, the Halibert family was widely acknowledged in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who had known Augustina since childhood always emphasized her exceptional attributes. She was portrayed as a caring, genuine, and affectionate child who adored dogs and stood out in design, crafts, and decoration. Helen, who shared her teenage years with Augustina, recognized her artistic gifts from a very early age. Helen recalled that when they were in school together, each class received a specific theme, and Augustina always assumed responsibility for decorating the classroom entrance with her outstanding drawings and large-scale models. While her classmates worked on cutting and pasting, they followed Augustina's direction because they knew she was well ahead, producing impressive models. Augustina also had a deep enthusiasm for fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school classmates. People close to her fondly called her a ghost and described her as outgoing and an excellent hostess. She enjoyed dressing stylishly, and during her teenage years, her friends frequently gathered in the garage of her home for pre-dance events. She consistently tried to bring her different circles of friends together, always seeking to connect people. Augustina loved baking and cooking, and she was talented at it. She had a refined sense of taste and excelled at numerous activities. She was naturally curious, and whenever something sparked her interest, she pursued it fully. After completing her secondary education, she initially began studying architecture, but eventually abandoned it. At that period, she directed her focus toward fashion design and studied it for some time, though she ultimately changed her path. Nevertheless, she was a thriving young woman who applied her knowledge to pursue her aspirations. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. She even launched her own clothing line, worked as a model, and was steadily developing her career. At a certain point in her adulthood, Augustina's path intersected with that of Juan Manuel Reverter, with whom she began a relationship that initially appeared to be going well. Very little is known about Juan Manuel's personal background, and not even the names of his parents were made public. Only a message from an acquaintance mentioned them as Moni and Mauricio, while the rest of the family information has remained undisclosed. The sole available detail concerning Juan Manuel is his LinkedIn account, where he presents himself as a software engineer, a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina, though his declared residence was Toronto and the surrounding areas in Canada. Curiously, a search at the university did not confirm him as a graduate. Rather, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had failed 2 courses during the years 2008 and 2009, which caused him to lose his standing as a regular student in the Information Systems Engineering program. The relationship between Augustina and Juan Manuel began amid the pandemic and was marked by fluctuations. According to some of her relatives, he demonstrated psychological abuse towards her and showed controlling behavior. However, the situation intensified in the summer of 2021, characterized by more severe disputes and violence inflicted by Juan Manuel against Augustina. Her father revealed that she was profoundly impacted by the relationship, but with the support of her family, she managed to rebuild her life and avoided any contact with him for an entire year. By September 2022, Augustina made the decision to relocate to Mexico, specifically to the scenic coastal town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to advance her modeling career. She rented an apartment, leaving the comfort of her homeland in Argentina behind and establishing a significant distance between herself and Juan Manuel. In Mexico, Augustina sustained herself by taking part in advertising events as a hostess and engaging in modeling work. She dreamed of traveling the world while building her modeling profession. She adored Playa del Carmen and felt genuinely content there. She quickly secured employment and was flourishing. She built numerous friendships and had the support of a childhood companion who was also residing in the region. Thus, Augustina was not on her own. In addition, she brought her dog with her for emotional comfort. Agostina's enthusiasm for traveling was clearly reflected in her social media activity. Brazil, New Zealand, China, and European capitals such as Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels were among the destinations Agostina had enjoyed visiting and showcasing to her 16,000 Instagram followers. One of her upcoming aspirations was to relocate to Europe. Candela, Agostina's 21-year-old sister, had come to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen. She wanted to experience the stunning Mexican beach setting and remain close to her elder sister. They decided to live together in Agostina's apartment, as it contained 2 rooms and provided comfort for both. At the end of December, Agostina's ex-boyfriend, Juan Manuel, re-emerged. He arrived to visit her for the holidays, they reconciled, and he ended up staying with both sisters. Candela would never have opted to share an apartment with her sister's partner. But the events moved so quickly that before she realized it, the man had already settled into Agostina's room. In her latest conversations with her relatives, Agostina confessed that they had chosen to restore their relationship and announced their intention to relocate to Spain. However, the harmony in their relationship was consistently fleeting. On Thursday, February 16th, a heated quarrel erupted after Agostina discovered infidelity. The environment inside the apartment became extremely strained. On the afternoon of Friday, February 17th, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan Manuel. When she returned the following morning at 7, she attempted to enter her sister's apartment, but the door was locked. She asked the building's doorman whether there was a way to gain entry, and he explained that shouting and fighting had been heard in that unit during the night. The police had been called twice following neighbors' complaints. Candela returned to the apartment and persisted in trying to enter. She typed in the access code, but it failed. The door was locked from the inside, leaving her with no option but to knock. After knocking repeatedly, her sister's boyfriend finally woke up and opened the door. Almost instantly, Juan Manuel asked Candela about Agostina's whereabouts, and she reproached him, questioning how she could possibly know where her sister was since she had left the night before, leaving the two of them together. She insisted that he should be aware of where Agostina was, but he answered that she was asleep. While they quarreled, Agostina's small dog began barking, leading Candela to follow the sound toward the bathroom of the apartment. There, she discovered Agostina with a bathrobe belt fastened around her neck, tied to a hand towel holder positioned only 4 feet from the ground. Agostina's sister and her boyfriend untied her and carried her into the living room, where they attempted CPR. However, Agostina was already deceased. Candela then contacted the police, after which forensic specialists examined the location and transferred the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was performed, followed by immediate cremation. The case was at first categorized as a suicide, and it was deemed closed. Nevertheless, despite the ruling of the Mexican judicial system, the Halibert family believed that Agostina's death was in fact a homicide perpetrated by her boyfriend, and they had reasons to support this view. By late February, Edgardo addressed a letter to the Foreign Ministry. The letter, which arrived at the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, requested intervention from the appropriate authorities in Mexico and explained that the family had endured a feeling of helplessness concerning their daughter's death. He outlined that the legal procedure was filled with flaws because none of the essential protocols were carried out to determine the true causes of her passing. The boyfriend was not arrested, his phone was not seized, no toxicological examinations were performed, and possible injuries were not reviewed. Beyond this, the family was denied access to the case. Despite attempts made by the Argentine consul to secure copies of the legal records, he did not succeed. Meanwhile, Edgardo emphasized that the Foreign Ministry had a duty to investigate and sanction acts of violence against women and to guarantee the family's right to transparency regarding the circumstances of Agostina's death. Concerning this ongoing matter, the involvement of the Foreign Ministry is of utmost significance because under the current conditions of the investigation in Mexico, Juan Manuel remains free to act. Since Agostina's death was ruled a suicide, her partner's legal standing is not jeopardized at present, which is why he is not treated as a fugitive, but rather as a person of concern to the family. Nonetheless, it is crucial to consider that both Agostina and Juan Manuel are Argentine citizens, and the Foreign Ministry must safeguard the rights of both parties, even in the event that it is demonstrated that the man committed the crime of which the deceased influencer's family accuses him. For her part, Carolina, Agostina's mother, undertook a campaign in the media to pursue justice and apply pressure on Mexican investigators. She exposed the abusive relationship between the victim and her partner. Carolina declared that her daughter was murdered by her boyfriend, and in a televised interview, she stated that her daughter had been tortured, burned, mistreated, and beaten, including blows to the head, all before her death. She was certain that he had staged the alleged hanging from the towel rack. Agustina was a tall woman, and she was dressed and prepared to go out when Candela discovered her. According to Carolina, nobody who intends to commit suicide takes the trouble to get dressed. She also recalled that Juan Manuel had a record of violence. During a press conference shared on social media, it was revealed that the couple had been dealing with ongoing issues that had been kept a secret. She mentioned that the man had never inspired trust, and 2 years earlier, they had rescued Agustina from the apartment she shared with Juan Manuel after a physical assault on her part. She stated that if they hadn't gone to rescue her that day, her daughter would have lost her life at that moment. After that violent incident, Agustina chose not to report it, and her parents decided to respect her decision, although they believed it was best not to let such incidents go unreported to the authorities. The consequences of not taking action at that time were felt 2 years later in Mexico. According to her mother's account, on Friday, February 17th, Agustina sent a message at 2:30 p.m. saying that she felt ugly and believed that she did not deserve a man who would hurt her. Carolina provided support from afar and encouraged her to leave the apartment. She reminded her that there was no need to be with that man. She advised her to kick him out of the house and not even get upset about a person who wasn't worth it. In her opinion, her daughter, by returning to that violent man, had played a risky card and it ended badly to her regret. The model's uncle, Herman, stated that Juan Manuel's parents had contacted the family and promised to cooperate. However, the dialogue ended when the man did not show up for a Zoom meeting where he was supposed to share his version of the events. Regarding this absence, Carolina said that he had remained in hiding but was likely listening and watching everything to stay informed about the case. In her view, he would have given his version if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she said that Juan Manuel's parents were responsible for covering up what she considered a monster. On March 8th, International Women's Day, there were marches in Mexico and Argentina demanding justice for Agustina. This increased pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which announced that it would investigate the death of the Argentine model as a possible femicide. This decision was based on the autopsy report, which showed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple lacerations on the body, and bruises consistent with sexual abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Halliburton family analyzed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, such as punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. Additionally, the forensic expert noted lacerations in several parts of the body and internal and external hematomas, suggesting recent and non-consensual sexual activity. However, the only available evidence is this forensic report because, as mentioned earlier, the Mexican authorities proceeded to cremate Agustina's body shortly after classifying the case as suicide. Following the mobilizations on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it had reclassified the case, originally labeled as suicide, and had begun investigating it as a possible femicide. The family's lawyer stated that the case had been referred to a special unit equipped to handle such cases. She further accused the main suspect, Juan Manuel, of attempting to stage a suicide and highlighted signs of violence at the scene. The apartment was locked from the inside. There were visible injuries on both the victim and her partner. A table leg was found out of place and on the floor, and 2 calls had been made to the police the previous night. She also criticized the judicial investigation, revealing that the crime scene had not been properly secured, contrary to protocol. It was essential for the scene, and the victim's body to be preserved until the investigation concluded. She added that due to numerous errors, information that could have been obtained from the devices was lost since the perpetrator took the cell phones and all the data within. The investigation into Agustina's violent death in Mexico promises to be a challenging journey for the family, which has been following the case from Argentina, more than 7,000 kilometers away, with a different legal system and culture. New statements were made by the prosecutor of the state of Quintana Roo on March 13, 2023, asserting that the Argentine model and influencer had taken her own life parachment and scientifically. These declarations were made during a press conference held by the security cabinet of that Mexican province. The prosecutor detailed that there was a history of violence both before and during her relationship with her partner. He stated that it could not be ruled out that Juan Manuel might have induced her to take her own life, and that could be a matter of investigation. When questioned by journalists about the cigarette burns on the woman's body, he assured that these injuries occurred before her suicide. He explained that there had been violence the night before her death between her and her partner, and there was sufficient evidence of this. Regarding Juan Manuel, the prosecutor stated that he had been interviewed by the investigative police, and at that time, they did not have enough evidence for an arrest or any other legal action against him. However, this did not mean that he would not be pursued later if a connection to Agustina's death could be established. Edgardo, Agustina's father, insisted on the need to change the classification of the case, as their lawyer had found numerous pieces of evidence to classify it as femicide. When asked by an Argentine media about the prosecutor's statements, Herman, the victim's uncle, expressed that they were not surprised that the Attorney General was defending the suicide theory because acknowledging that there were many elements suggesting femicide would mean admitting their failures. He believed that the prosecution had acted clumsily and hastily in the early stages of the investigation, leading to the loss of crucial evidence. However, as the case was transferred to the specialized unit, it indicated that something had gone wrong, as it is not common to replace a team that had performed well. He argued that the prosecutor was trying to defend the initial theory because going in a different direction would be an acknowledgement of their poor work. Gerardo Rianazzo, a journalist, provided details of the judicial process. He explained that the Prosecutor General's office reclassified the death as femicide, due to pressure from Agustina's family, the lawyer, and a feminist march on March 8th. However, in the subsequent hours, the justice system announced that they were still considering the suicide theory. He highlighted that, in general, the prosecutor's office did not want to validate the independent expert opinion that had found injuries compatible with femicide. Recognizing this would mean accepting that someone outside the prosecutor's office had solved a problem. They should have handled with a properly executed expert analysis. Regarding Juan Manuel's situation, he pointed out that the prosecutor's office would have to call the boyfriend to discuss the case. In the event of her suicide, he would inevitably be part of the investigation, at least in the statements that should have been taken to determine what had happened. To make matters worse, the journalist emphasized that the crime was discovered on a weekend and during weekends in Mexico. Intern trainees and junior investigators typically handled duties. This could have been the reason why everything was mishandled. He believed their actions had not been intentional but were instead the result of inexperience. This was evident in the way the case was managed. A few days later, in Argentina, reports emerged about a phone call received by Agustina's father shortly after the Women's Day March. A prosecutor from Quintana Roo contacted Edgardo by phone, following instructions from the state prosecutor's office, as they wished to speak with the family. Before hearing directly from the father, the caller, who spoke on behalf of others whose identities were uncertain, explained that the system wanted to apologize for what had taken place. They stressed that if Agustina's boyfriend carried any responsibility, he would certainly be prosecuted, since there was no intention within the prosecutor's office to conceal anything. They further stated that if any official within the prosecutor's office was found responsible, appropriate measures would be taken. He also promptly clarified that he would arrange a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of specialists to present the father with the material they had. He mentioned that the general prosecutor had ordered other Mexican state agencies to review the autopsy as well. Then the prosecutor, who had initially spoken softly, suddenly altered his tone and voiced a grievance. He referred to accusations that the femicide protocol had not been followed, insisting that every case involving a woman's death was addressed under the femicide protocol. Edgardo, too, abandoned formality and shifted from the role of a mourning parent to that of a man demanding justice for Agustina. After asking the prosecutor for his name, he addressed him directly as Carlos and firmly expressed his stance on the issue. He told him that if so-called experts found a young woman dead under such circumstances, hanging with a man inside the home, and they failed to arrest him, take his testimony, or confiscate his phone, then the investigation was deeply flawed. He added that after reviewing the autopsy and seeing what his daughter had suffered, his conclusion was that everything had collapsed. A total failure, because his daughter had lost her life. The most recent update arrived at the end of March, just days before the one-month anniversary of Agostina's death. The theories of suicide and femicide are still being investigated along separate lines. Hal Abert's lawyer explained that the case had been transferred to the Women's Crimes Division, which means Agostina's case is now included on the femicide and gender violence docket. She continued collaborating with the prosecutor assigned to the matter and concentrated exclusively on proving the femicide perspective, submitting additional evidence, and probing the boyfriend's involvement. She apologized for her inability to disclose further details, but clarified that all leads associated with the homicide were under confidentiality. Concerning the issue of when Juan Manuel might be arrested, the lawyer stated that it would hinge on the conclusion of the investigation, emphasizing that it was for the prosecutor to decide whether sufficient proof had been presented or whether further evidence was necessary. Nonetheless, she reaffirmed her conviction in being able to establish everything. Neighbors reported hearing screams until approximately 2:30 in the morning. According to testimonies gathered after that hour, silence dominated the area. The time of death recorded in the incomplete autopsy report was 4 a.m. While Agostina's family persists in their demand for justice, the alleged offender remains in an undisclosed location. Even though the Mexican judicial system has not issued a warrant for his arrest, and no judicial proceedings have been initiated in Argentina since the alleged crime took place in another nation, he continues to live freely. However, he has not made any public appearance and has avoided confronting the family of the girlfriend he supposedly loved and resided with until the day of her death. This case is still ongoing, but because it is in an early stage, many of the proceedings are being carried out cautiously and outside media coverage. The prosecutor's office investigating the suspected femicide issued a directive to establish Reverter's whereabouts. The order, released on June 7th by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for the Investigation and Prosecution of Femicide, called for the search, location, and request of Reverter's appearance without restraining his freedom. As stated, the purpose is to broaden their questioning to obtain more information and comply with the mandate of this authority. Moving on to the next case. Angela Rowe. Raheem Taylor, 58 years old, was the fifth execution of 2023, following a previous execution in Missouri, 2 in Texas, and 1 in Oklahoma. All were carried out by lethal injection. Taylor kicked his feet as the 5 grams of pentobarbital were administered, then took 5 or 6 deep breaths before all movement ceased. In a final statement, Taylor said, "Muslims don't die, but live eternally in the hearts of our family and friends. Death is not your enemy. It is your destiny. Look forward to meeting it. Peace." Leonard Taylor was born in the United States in the mid-1960s. He was the son of Jesse, who also had another son named Perry Taylor. In the late 1980s, Leonard met a girl named Mia Perry, with whom he became romantically involved. Around this time, Leonard began to accumulate a criminal record. Initially, he was convicted on charges related to narcotics and concealed weapons in San Bernardino County and served time in prison, although the length of his sentence remains unclear. In September 1990, a 19-year-old man was fatally attacked following an argument in an apartment complex in the same county. By that time, Leonard, who had been released, was living in the area. Due to his criminal record, he became one of the primary suspects in the case, but managed to avoid responsibility. As part of his effort to evade justice, he used a false name, Michael Chambers. The following year, in 1991, Mia became pregnant. The news of his first child did not motivate Leonard to change his behavior. During this period, he was arrested by the Drug Enforcement Administration and convicted for transporting and selling narcotics, resulting in his incarceration in a federal prison. Since his daughter was born under these circumstances, he was unable to be present with Mia during the birth. Facing reality, Mia named the baby on her own and prepared to raise her child independently. Soon after, what people had predicted became true. Leonard's connection to his newborn seemed increasingly unlikely when, in 1992, he was found guilty of statutory rape and child abuse in San Diego County. While in prison, he disclosed to a local media outlet that he maintained connections with some scammers involved in irregularities related to corporate check fraud. Upon his release, Leonard embarked on a short-lived career in white-collar crime, which quickly returned him to jail, this time in Missouri State Prison. The San Bernardino police arrested him again in 1999 for failing to register as a sex offender. Shortly after the turn of the 2000s, Leonard faced another accusation, this time for intimate coercion against a minor. Aside from his illicit businesses, which required him to travel across the country, he maintained relationships and intimacy with multiple women simultaneously, earning him the nickname CAs, short for Casanova. Another notable aspect of his criminal behavior was making and using fake IDs and different names, ending up with nearly 20 of them at some unknown time. He married a woman living in California who also had an outstanding arrest warrant for a probation violation. It was during this period, under unspecified circumstances, that Leonard met Angela Rowe. Their first encounter occurred in the city of Jennings in St. Louis County, Missouri. Angela was born around 1976. She had previously been in a romantic relationship with a man with whom she had other children, Alexis Conley, Acrea Conley, and Tyrese Conley. Despite being married and also involved with another woman in Kentucky, Leonard began a relationship with Angela. After a relatively brief period, he moved into her house located in the suburbs of St. Louis. Angela's home was well known among neighbors for the constant joy radiated by her 3 young children. From that point on, Angela's house and her children also became the love nest for the new couple. By the end of 2004, Leonard and Angela had been living together for approximately a year, and according to her family and friends, their cohabitation was not without challenges and difficulties. On Saturday, November 20th, 2004, a friend called Angela and asked to borrow $50. At that time of year, the traditional holiday season was approaching. Being a mother of 3 children, Christmas held particular importance for Angela. Therefore, she later took the time to decorate the house with her children, hanging large and striking candy canes at the entrance and placing lights to enhance the festive atmosphere. That weekend, the children went to celebrate Thanksgiving early with Tyrone, their father, and his side of the family. Meanwhile, on Sunday, November 21st, Angela did not appear for her weekend shift as a housekeeper, but called to inform that she would be unable to come. The following day, a friend called her, and they chatted as usual. The children returned to their mother's house and were seen by some neighbors in the following days. From that weekend in November 2004, several significant events occurred, yet the exact how and when of the detailed events could never be fully reconstructed by authorities. However, all evidence points to an argument between Leonard and Angela, during which she threatened him with a knife. He then overpowered her and shot her. In a tragic turn of events, realizing that the children had witnessed everything, Leonard took the lives of all 3 children. Afterwards, he turned off the heating and instead activated the central air conditioning in the house. According to phone records, on November 23, 2004, at 11:24 p.m., Leonard called his brother Perry to ask for money. It is believed that during this conversation, he confessed to what had happened, stating that things had gotten out of control and that it was not what he wanted, but it happened. On the same day, Angela's friend repeatedly called the house phone without receiving an answer. A few hours later, at 12:05 p.m. on Wednesday, November 24th, she tried again without success. Between that day and the next, Perry informed his girlfriend about what Leonard had done. On Thursday, November 25th, while most American households were finalizing preparations to celebrate Thanksgiving, Perry went to his girlfriend's house. There, his brother contacted him again. After the conversation, Perry told the girl that Leonard was still in Angela's house, waiting for a letter from California. There were 3 more calls in the following hours, one of which was specifically made from the landline at Angela's house. During one of these conversations, Perry's girlfriend heard him ask Leonard how he was still there, explicitly referring to the presence of the bodies. Leonard's response remains unknown. Subsequently, a plane ticket from St. Louis to California was booked, with the transaction made using a phone number with a California area code. Early on the morning of Friday, November 26th, Leonard went to his sister-in-law's house so she could drive him to the airport. He had plane tickets from St. Louis to Ontario, California, via Phoenix, Arizona. The ticket was issued in the name of Lewis Bradley, an alias Leonard used, for which he possessed a Missouri ID that included his photograph. He took advantage of being at his sister-in-law's house to leave a box intended for his brother. Shortly afterward, according to some witnesses, he was seen disposing of a gun in a sewer near Perry's girlfriend's house, but the weapon was never recovered. On the way to the airport, Leonard told his sister-in-law that this would probably be the last time she would see him alive. To elaborate on this strange notion, he added that some people were trying to kill him and that she should not pay attention to anything she might hear about him. Security cameras recorded Leonard that Friday morning passing through the security area at St. Louis International Airport. He was wearing dark pants, a pink shirt, and a cream-colored hat, carrying 2 black bags. Shortly afterward, he proceeded to Gate 16 to catch Southwest Airlines Flight 810 to Ontario. Meanwhile, Angela's friend continued calling throughout those days until November 27th, never receiving a response. On the other side of the country, between Saturday and Sunday, Leonard finally reunited with his wife. During this period, Angela's absence was noticed by her co-workers, but unlike previous occasions, there was no call from her to report anything. Leonard remained in San Bernardino County for 4 days before driving across the country with a friend. He traveled through Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia, ultimately arriving at a house in Kentucky. During the week of November 29th, when classes resumed after the Thanksgiving holiday, the absence of Angela's children at school did not go unnoticed. With growing concern over Angela's prolonged silence, her family requested that the police check on her and her 3 children. Thus, on December 3, 2004, police officers were dispatched to the small brick house in the suburbs of St. Louis. Upon arrival, the officers observed several significant details, including that the front door was locked. Newspapers were piled up in the front yard, and mail overflowed from the mailbox. The team managed to gain entry through a bedroom window. The air conditioning was running at full power, while the television was on. What the agents encountered next was far from an idyllic home scene. Wrapped in blankets, Angela was found lifeless, likely from gunshot wounds. Her 3 young children also appeared to have suffered fatal gunshot wounds, and their bodies were arranged on a bed in the early stages of decomposition. The coroner determined that the victims had died 2 or 3 days before their bodies became stiff. Meanwhile, during subsequent thorough investigations at the residence, investigators discovered 2 non-functional cell phones, and there was no evidence that Angela had any other cell phone in use besides her own. As is often the case in such situations, Leonard was immediately considered the primary suspect. This was initially due to his relationship with Angela, but it is fair to say that his extensive criminal history also raised suspicions. As the police tracked his whereabouts, Perry was interrogated regarding the accusations against his brother on December 8, 2004. During that interview, Perry told detectives that Leonard had called him and admitted to his actions. Following an intense nationwide pursuit, police located a house in Madisonville, Kentucky, where Leonard was staying. On December 9th, Leonard attempted to flee by hiding on the floor of a vehicle and was arrested on the spot, holding a knife in his hand and using the alias Jason. Beyond that, he made no movements nor uttered any comments. The sunglasses Leonard was wearing at the time of his arrest, along with a few other belongings, were taken as evidence, although nothing indicated that these items could provide any clues. Later, the police issued statements regarding the arrest. According to the detective in charge, Leonard's wife was not much help in the investigation. Authorities believed Leonard had turned to her for money to facilitate his escape. While the only suspect was finally in custody, the funeral services for Angela and her kids were held in Missouri. Standing beside his oldest daughter's coffin, Tyrone could not help but break down. Leonard maintained his innocence throughout, and indeed, his defense focused on the fact that he was in California when the bodies were discovered. His case was also based on the probable date of death, stated by the coroner. However, the suspicions for the 4 deaths were only part of his legal troubles. Thus, while awaiting the resolution of the case, in April 2005, Leonard began serving a 100-year sentence for an unrelated conviction. 5 months later, he filed a request for the state to notify him if there was any intention to use DNA evidence in the case involving Angela and her 3 children, and if so, what type it would be, and whether physical evidence had been presented for analysis or examination. On May 25, 2006, Leonard filed a motion requesting the return of his personal belongings, including the sunglasses he wore when arrested. But in August 2006, the state took possession of the glasses and other evidence that were in police custody. And 3 months later, in November, all items were taken to the forensic lab for analysis. There, experts conducted a specialized test, which is used to determine the possible presence of blood. The procedure yielded a positive result for the presence of blood on the nose pad of the sunglasses. But there was a complication since the sample was very small. For this reason, a second confirmation test to detect the presence of DNA was not performed. Between the end of that year and the beginning of 2007, the stain was subjected to DNA testing. But due to its size, the professional in charge could not obtain a complete genetic profile. What was obtained from the partial genetic profile excluded Angela's children. However, the presence of her DNA could not be ruled out from the study. Specifically, the result had a probability of matching 1 in every 12,300 people belonging to the African American population. In May 2007, Leonard filed a motion to exclude the results of these tests as evidence in the trial. A hearing was held where the state explained that the reports were disclosed as soon as they were received and that, contrary to what Leonard suggested, the evidence was not deliberately hidden. Ultimately, the trial court rejected his request. In January 2008, Leonard again insisted on the same point by filing a new motion to exclude any evidence related to the specialized test. Another hearing took place, and the court overruled Leonard's objection, thus admitting the validity of the results as evidence of the presumed presence of blood. During the trial that year, Leonard objected to the admission of this evidence, but again faced a setback when the trial court dismissed his objections. However, the forensic scientist who conducted the tests testified that the test is presumptive because it can also yield a positive reaction to substances like potatoes, rust, bleach, and nickel. He also emphasized that since there was no confirmatory examination, the substance on the glasses was only possibly blood. Leonard did not testify at his trial. However, the coroner did testify, and his testimony marked a significant turn in the case, as he stated that the deaths could have occurred 2 or 3 weeks before the officers visited the house. This detail firmly placed the incident before Leonard's departure to California. He also explained that he had not initially considered the detail that the air conditioning thermostat was set to the maximum cold setting. When the state called Perry as a witness, the case seemed to turn again, especially when asked about his statement during the police interrogation, where he said that Leonard had confessed to the acts. He said he did not remember anything that happened, and went even further to claim that his statements to the police had been the result of coercion by the authorities. After hearing from the various witnesses, it was time for the closing arguments. The state, represented by the prosecution, emphasized that the blood sample found on the man's sunglasses was indeed Angela's. In this sense, it was recalled that scientific evidence does not need to be conclusive to be admissible. Indeed, while some states require it to be so, other states have held that presumptive blood tests are admissible as long as they are accurately described, achieving their purpose of being useful to the jury. After deliberating for 4.5 hours, the jury found Leonard Taylor guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of armed criminal action. There is, however, a particular aspect of his sentencing. Although it has not been possible to determine exactly when and how, it appears that during his time in prison, Leonard converted to Islam, even adopting the name Rahim. Thus, during the sentencing hearing, also known as the penalty phase, he prohibited his defense team from presenting witnesses. Instead, he stated that he was Muslim and expressed to the judge that Allah, not the court, would determine his fate. The state presented evidence, including Leonard's prior convictions. Testimony was also provided by a victim who had been forced by Leonard into intimacy, as well as by 3 members of Angela's family. The jury identified 5 aggravating factors for each victim, including mental provocation, which rendered the acts outrageously vile, horrendous, and inhumane, demonstrating cruelty and disdain for the sanctity of all human life. Consequently, Leonard was sentenced to capital punishment. The execution by lethal injection was scheduled for February 7, 2023, at a Missouri prison. The case drew the attention of several groups dedicated to defending Leonard's innocence, demanding a review and commutation of the sentence. However, the man's claims of innocence were repeatedly rejected. In response to some of the appeals, the Missouri Attorney General's office stated that the case against him was solid. Perry, Leonard's brother, died in 2015. In January 2023, as the execution date approached, Leonard's attorneys requested a hearing regarding their client's claim of innocence. They were supported by a provision in Missouri law, which allows a prosecutor to file a motion for a hearing before a judge in cases of new evidence suggesting a wrongful conviction. First, Leonard's defense team proposed a theory involving an alternative perpetrator. According to this theory, after a drug deal went wrong, Leonard believed he would be targeted for murder and quickly left town. However, the traffickers arrived at Angela's house, and failing to find him or the illicit substances they expected to be there, they unleashed their fury on her and her 3 young children. Second, the defense team obtained statements from Leonard's daughter and from Mia, her mother. Both stated that he was in California at the end of November 2004, and according to the lawyers, he could not have committed the crimes. These documents were subsequently submitted to the Conviction Review Unit within the prosecutor's office. The following month, just hours before the scheduled execution, the St. Louis County prosecutor rejected the request for a hearing before a judge, stating that the facts did not support a credible claim of innocence. Concurrently, the governor refused to grant a pardon, and the United States Supreme Court also declined to intervene. Finally, on Tuesday, February 7, 2023, in the evening, all arrangements were made to carry out the procedure. In his final statement, Leonard said that Muslims do not die, but live eternally in the hearts of family and friends. Taylor kicked his feet as the 5 grams of pentobarbital were administered, then took 5 or 6 deep breaths before all movement ceased. Moving on to the next case. Ella Bennett. Ella Bennett was born on April 12, 2002 in Georgia, USA, into a family plagued by conflicts. To understand the environment she was born into and lived in during her brief life, it is necessary to understand her mother, Charity Lee. Her life was filled with challenges from an early age, marked by tragedy and later struggles with substance abuse and troubled relationships. Charity was born on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. To Killickler Bennett and James Robert Bennett Jr., a defining moment in her childhood occurred when she was only 6 years old. Her father, a 37-year-old trucking company owner, was shot to death in a violent attack inside their home in an exclusive residential area of Atlanta. He was discovered with multiple gunshot wounds to his head, chest, and back. The police reported that he had been alone at the time of the crime and that there were no signs of a struggle at the scene. At first, authorities suspected organized crime. However, following James' funeral, a shocking development emerged. Charity's mother, Keela, then 29, became the prime suspect in his murder. The charges were filed just 3 days after the couple, previously divorced, had remarried in Las Vegas. Evidence against Keela included details such as the unlocked doors of their home and her status as the primary heir to the trucking business. Additionally, the patrol officer who transported Keela after her arrest noted that she at times displayed satisfaction in her demeanor. During the trial, evidence was presented suggesting Keela had been in contact with a truck driver and could have been involved in the crime. Despite this, the jury declared her not guilty due to insufficient evidence, resulting in her acquittal. The presiding judge described it as the most unusual case of his career, given the range of plausible angles and hypotheses. The controversy surrounding her father's death and her mother's highly publicized trial profoundly affected Charity. During her mother's imprisonment, she was raised by her maternal grandparents. Throughout her childhood and adolescence, Charity longed for love and approval from her mother. In a desperate attempt to gain attention, she deliberately turned to drugs, frustrated by her mother's apparent indifference. At 17, Charity struggled with depression and heroin addiction, straining her relationship with her mother to the extent that she was expelled from the house. With only $100 given by her mother, Charity faced a stark choice between rehabilitation and a possible overdose. This money became her lifeline as she chose to enter a rehabilitation center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She maintained sobriety for about a year, securing a place to live and enrolling in college. Nevertheless, her path to sobriety was plagued by inner battles with her darkest demons. During these painful times, she attempted to take her life on several occasions. At the age of 18, Charity became pregnant with her first child, and at 3 months pregnant, she decided she had to leave that dark stage of her life behind for good in order to become the best mother for her unborn child. That baby, whom she named Paris, became the motivation she needed to recover. She often stated that her son had saved her life. When Paris Lee Bennett was born on October 10, 1993, in Abilene, Texas, Charity was alone because the child's father had abandoned her as soon as he learned of the pregnancy. Later, when Paris was 17 months old, his father returned to their lives. Charity recounted that it was evident the father was unwell, having been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and suffering from auditory and visual hallucinations. Paris was a very artistic and creative child who loved drawing. From the age of 3, he was introverted, not very sociable, and hesitant to show affection even to people he knew. The boy, who dreamed of becoming a paleontologist, was dedicated to his academic life. He studied diligently, had an IQ of 142, and never experienced difficulties in school. His performance surpassed that of his peers, and his teachers regarded him as a remarkable child with potential and a bright future. After having her baby, Charity married twice, but neither marriage was successful. One was to a man named Brendan, though the circumstances of their separation were not revealed. In her longing to build a family, Charity entered into a relationship with a man named Jonathan, and at the age of 28, she became pregnant with her second child, a daughter. The news brought joy to the family, but at first, Paris did not seem pleased about his mother's pregnancy, which caused concern for Charity. However, once his sister was born, everything shifted. Paris adored his sister, showing love, protectiveness, and attentiveness toward her. Paris had few friends, and his little sister became his playmate. She was affectionate, kind, intelligent, and very determined. From an early age, she displayed a compassionate spirit, even expressing her wish for her mother to adopt every hurt child in the world. Her loved ones described her as a little girl with a strong personality, who always voiced her thoughts. Over time, the happy home Charity had dreamed of turned into a nightmare. Her partner struggled with severe alcoholism and was a violent man. According to Charity, the relationship ended after her husband was stopped by a police officer, and, when asked to step out of the vehicle, he refused. The officer reached into the car, and the driver sped away, dragging the officer. The officer then fired and wounded him in the leg. When Charity learned of the incident, she decided she could not let her children grow up in such an environment and chose to separate. The young girl enjoyed her bond with her brother, finding joy and inspiration in playing with him, looking up to him as a role model and wanting to follow in his footsteps. Paris also seemed to cherish his time with his younger sister. Childhood videos and photographs captured them dancing, playing, and posing together, always with smiles. In 2005, Charity and her children moved to Dallas, Texas, to be closer to Kyla, Charity's mother, who had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Charity was a caring mother, but the stress and anxiety from her separation and conflicts with her mother led her to relapse into drug use. During the 6 months that Charity was under the influence, Paris assumed the role of the protective older brother, a responsibility that profoundly altered his outlook. He no longer viewed his mother as a loving figure, but as a flawed and disappointing woman. Soon after, the three moved to Kyla's ranch in Seymour, Texas, where their lives grew even more chaotic. It was during this period that a more emotionally unstable and violent side of Paris began to surface. He had sudden fits of rage, banging his head against the wall or throwing objects on the floor to attract attention. Yet Charity failed to interpret these signals. On one occasion at the ranch, Paris broke a toy that his sister and a friend were playing with. Charity scolded and punished him, but minutes later, after she stepped away, Paris grabbed a kitchen knife and ran outside with it. Startled by the screams of a ranch worker, Charity and Kyla rushed to the scene and managed to disarm him after a struggle. Alarmed by her son's behavior, Charity took Paris to a psychiatric center. However, feeling that he was not given sufficient attention, she brought him back home. According to some accounts, similar incidents occurred later. On one such occasion, Paris threatened his aunt and sister, prompting Charity to take him again to a health center, where he underwent several evaluations. A specialist told her that it was troubling for a child so young to harbor thoughts of harming others and recommended treatment. However, Charity reacted defensively, finding the assessment insulting and dismissing the advice. Still, uncertainty about how to manage her son lingered in her mind. Shortly after, the family relocated to Abilene. Over time, Paris developed growing resentment toward his mother, leading to frequent arguments between them. For Charity, although her son's changes confused her, she never believed they were as serious as the psychologist had suggested. Unfortunately, she was wrong. Then came February 4, 2007. That morning, 13-year-old Paris was visibly upset with his mother. But since fights between them had become a daily occurrence, she dismissed it as ordinary teenage behavior. At the time, Charity was working at a well-known restaurant near Abilene and had hired a babysitter for the evening while she worked. She thought she had faced worse situations with Paris and believed that, as always, things would eventually settle. Before leaving, she approached her son, kissed him, and told him she loved him. That day was particularly demanding because of the Super Bowl. After midnight, around 12:30 a.m. on February 5, 2007, exhausted from the long shift, Charity was cleaning tables at the restaurant, eager to go home and rest with her children. That was when several police officers arrived. As she headed toward the manager's office, she heard her name mentioned and felt a wave of dread. Confused and disoriented, she couldn't comprehend what was happening when an officer told her that her 4-year-old daughter was injured. Her first instinct was to ask what had happened and where her daughter was. Then came the devastating words: her daughter had passed away. The shock was unbearable, and Charity fainted. There is nothing more horrifying for a mother than losing a child. But the truth she soon learned was even more cruel and unbearable than she could have imagined. While being escorted to the station, she asked about her son, Paris. An officer replied simply, "We have him." That stark answer confirmed her worst nightmare. Hearing that her daughter was gone had already shattered her. But realizing that Paris was the one responsible felt like breaking those shattered pieces into dust. According to the police investigation, that night the babysitter had taken the children out for Chinese food. They later returned home and watched a children's movie. The little girl then went to her room to sleep, while Paris retreated to his because he had to finish his homework. It's unknown at what moment Paris decided to end his sister's life, but as a bright and manipulative teenager, around 10 at night, he managed to convince the babysitter she could go home, assuring her that his mother was on her way. With her absence, it would be easier for him to execute his plan. What happened once they were alone was a true scene of terror. Paris went to Ella's room, beat her, sexually abused the little girl, barely 4 years old, and suffocated her. Then, with a knife he had taken from the kitchen, he gave her 17 fatal stabs. Right after the attack, Paris picked up the phone and called a friend, speaking casually about different topics for 6 minutes. Just 2 minutes after hanging up, at 11:42 p.m., he dialed 911. On the emergency call, he sounded desperate and distressed about what he had done. When the operator asked if Ella was bleeding, he admitted she was, explaining that he had stabbed her several times. The dispatcher instructed him to perform CPR and guided him step by step. On the recording, Paris could be heard counting aloud as if following directions. However, investigators later determined he never actually tried to revive her. The position of Ella's body and the bloodstain patterns made it clear no resuscitation had taken place. To excuse his actions, Paris told the operator he had been hallucinating and believed his little sister was a demon. Soon, the street outside was filled with police and paramedics. Paris was taken into custody and brought to the police station while the investigation began at their home. During interrogation, he again mentioned his demonic hallucinations, claiming he was sleeping with his sister and woke up to her face looking different, like a demon engulfed in flames. He said he thought she was possessed and attacked her in a panic attack. As Paris continued his account, however, he fell into contradictions. He mentioned feeling resentment towards his sister since her birth because he was no longer the center of attention. Initially, investigators thought jealousy might have motivated the attack, but then he revealed his original plan also included killing his mother when she returned home. After a long, confusing, and painful night, Charity arrived at the police station to see her son. The inconsolable mother was shattered, but became emotional upon seeing Paris. She got up, hugged, and caressed him amid tears, showing him she was there for him. Paris's reaction, in contrast, was cold and emotionless. He simply sat and coldly asked her what she planned to do. When Charity broke down in tears asking what he meant, Paris reminded her that she had always said she could take someone's life if they harmed her children. His question was not out of fear, but rather a challenge. At that moment, Charity realized there was something very dark in her son. Following his arrest, Paris was charged with the murder but not tried as an adult, as the minimum age for adult prosecution in Texas is 14 years. Instead, he was charged in juvenile court and pleaded guilty to capital murder. Charity was left feeling confused and unsure of what to do next. Although Paris's defense team suggested he not plead guilty for Charity, this was unthinkable. She couldn't hate her son and wanted him to be held accountable for his actions. Yet she also desperately sought to understand what had driven him to such extremes. While the prosecution aimed for a life sentence, his lawyer was preparing to secure the lightest sentence possible. As part of their efforts, the defense advised against Charity receiving mental health counseling, fearing that the prosecution might use the reports against Paris. Despite the traumatic ordeal she faced as the mother of both the victim and the perpetrator, she finally accessed counseling 2 years after the crime. She was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and depressive disorders. Charity lost 15 kilograms in 13 days, started self-harming, and harbored a strong desire to die. Nevertheless, she knew she had to be strong for Paris, whom she never stopped loving despite the circumstances. In the months following, Paris was in complete isolation. He didn't speak and communicated only through letters and drawings. 2 months before his sentencing, Paris began to reject simple instructions and became more violent. On one occasion, he repeatedly hit a fellow inmate in the face and received a warning for making derogatory comments about other inmates. He later flooded his cell and confronted guards who came to see what was happening. During evaluations, he referred to the crime against his sister with a smile on his face. Prison staff reported that Paris repeatedly tried to manipulate them into giving him his mother's address. At one point, Texas Department of Justice officials said he had hacked the jail's computer system, though the intent was unclear. During this time, 2 psychologists evaluated Paris, and a third reviewed the case. Each report described the boy as showing marked antisocial behavior, reduced empathy, and remorse. The first specialist wrote that he had a moderate risk of developing traits characteristic of psychopathy and pathological narcissism. The second asserted that the teenager displayed all the characteristics of a psychopath. The third went further, suggesting to Charity that she change her identity and move somewhere Paris could never find her. Paris was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which is the maximum sentence for capital murder in a Texas juvenile court. Had he been an adult, he would have faced the death penalty. Paris will first be eligible for parole in February 2027. If parole is never granted, he will remain incarcerated until February 2047, when he will be released in his early 50s. 2 years after his sentencing, Paris made chilling confessions about his true motivations. He admitted that his original plan had been to kill his mother, Charity. However, he concluded that taking Ella's life would cause her far greater suffering than killing her directly. By murdering her 4-year-old daughter, he ensured that Charity would endure a lifetime of pain. In 2013, 6 years after Ella's death, Charity became pregnant again and chose to raise her new baby, Phoenix, on her own. Though still broken by the loss of Ella, Phoenix's birth brought light and renewed strength into her life. But his arrival came with challenges. Phoenix was born with a defective heart valve and required open-heart surgery soon after birth. Thankfully, he recovered successfully. When Paris learned of his mother's pregnancy, he sent a letter expressing joy for her and for the child, despite knowing he would never meet his half-brother. Legal restrictions prohibited him from contacting minors under 17, which relieved Charity, who never brought Phoenix to visit the prison. Still, Paris spoke with him occasionally over the phone when Charity called her son, though she always feared exposing Phoenix to any danger. At 19, in 2013, Paris was transferred to an adult prison. 6 years later, in 2019, he drew widespread attention during an interview with journalist Piers Morgan. Appearing calm at age 26, Paris admitted that he had never truly achieved any satisfaction from killing Ella. He claimed he was no longer the same person who committed the crime, though he acknowledged the intense hatred he once felt toward his mother and revealed that violent thoughts had plagued him since childhood. Paris' case inspired documentaries that exposed his manipulative and narcissistic traits. Yet, he always maintained that he was not mentally ill. For years, Charity kept in contact with him through visits, letters, and phone calls. She shared her story with the media, saying that after losing her daughter, nothing in her life made sense anymore. It marked the end of the life she once knew. Looking back, she regretted relapsing into drugs, believing it harmed Paris, but she did not regret how she raised him. In 2021, Charity announced that she had cut off all contact with Paris. This decision followed her discovery that he had become romantically involved with a woman out on bail who lived 2 hours from her home. Charity admitted that although she still loved Paris as her son, she no longer liked the man he had turned into. After the tragedy, she created a foundation named Ella in memory of her daughter, with the name also representing empathy, love, lessons, and action. Through this organization, she counsels families of both crime victims and perpetrators. Having lived through both perspectives, first as a child when her mother was accused of murdering her father, and later as a mother when Paris killed her daughter, she speaks from experience. Charity knows the deep impact violent crimes leave on families. She believes the best way to honor Ella is by helping others through hardship, regardless of which side of the tragedy they are on. Her foundation reflects her dedication to supporting those affected by violence and building a space for healing and understanding. Charity's mission is to guide and encourage people confronting similar struggles, offering them a way forward through the pain and chaos such events bring. Moving on to the next case. Iara Gambarazio. In late November 2010, the sudden disappearance of a young girl sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Brambate di Sopra, a small town on the outskirts of the Alps in northern Italy. The investigation that followed is regarded as one of the largest in Italian history. This is the story of Iara Gambarazio, a twisted tale that captivated a nation. 13-year-old Iara Gambarazio came from a large, loving family. She was one of 4 children, born to Fulvio and Mora. Her father worked as an architect, and her mother was a teacher. Both families had lived in the Brambate di Sopra area for generations. It was a quiet town of approximately 8,000 residents. Despite being only an hour from the fashion capital Milan, life in Brambate di Sopra was markedly different. Time moved slowly, and the scenery was quintessential rural Italy, with cypress-lined streets and distant mountain views. It appeared to be the ideal place to raise a family. On Friday, November 26, 2010, Yara said goodbye to her family and set off to the local gym, where she trained in gymnastics. She left at 5:15 p.m. to walk the short couple-hundred-meter route she had taken countless times before. Yara intended to drop off a stereo for her instructor and return home immediately. When 2 hours passed and Yara had still not returned, worry began to mount for her parents. Yara's mother, Mora, called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. They waited until 7:30 p.m., hoping their daughter would arrive with an explanation for whatever had kept her busy. When she still had not come home, Yara's father, Fulvio, called the police. The call reached La Tisciarogari, the magistrate on duty in the nearby city of Bergamo. The experienced magistrate acted immediately, dispatching authorities to search for the missing 13-year-old girl. When retracing her steps, investigators discovered that Yara had made it to the gym that day, where she saw her instructor. They had conducted a light training session in preparation for an upcoming competition before Yara left and began her journey home. The last known contact with Yara was at 6:44 p.m., when she sent a text message to her close friend Martina, suggesting they could meet early the following weekend before the gymnastics meet. A few witnesses claimed to have seen Yara speaking with 2 men near a red car, but this could not be confirmed, and it was not certain that the girl they saw was indeed Yara. Tracker dogs were brought to the gym to trace Yara's route home. Instead, the dogs led their handlers in the opposite direction, toward Mappolo, a small commune located less than 10 minutes from Brambate di Sopra. Yara's phone records confirmed that her device had been in Mappolo at 6:49 p.m. that evening. As standard procedure in missing persons cases, the family was thoroughly questioned by authorities. Each member of the Gambarazio family was extensively interviewed, allowing investigators to rule them out as potential suspects. Mora and Fulvio were respected members of the community, and Yara was dearly loved by them and her 3 siblings. The Tisciarogari authorized wiretaps on hundreds of cell phones belonging to potential suspects and instructed her team to track the roughly 15,000 devices that had passed through Mappolo on November 26. This effort led to the identification of their first suspect, a Moroccan man named Mohammed Fikri. A conversation had been intercepted in which Fikri asked God for forgiveness and mentioned something about not being responsible for taking her life. At the time of Yara's disappearance, Fikri was employed at a construction site in Mappolo. By the time investigators suspected he might be connected to the case, he had already left. Fikri had boarded a boat bound for Tangiers, a city in northwestern Morocco. Italian authorities, however, were determined not to give up and set out to intercept the vessel. The mission succeeded, and Fikri was arrested. His van was subsequently searched, and inside, a mattress with dried red stains was discovered. It appeared they might be on the right track to uncovering Yara's fate, until further investigation revealed that the mattress was unrelated to the case and that the phrase reportedly overheard on the wiretap had been mistranslated. With these leads proving fruitless, the investigation began to slow, as no obvious new suspects emerged. The case had captured national attention, with the mystery of Yara's disappearance broadcast on countless Italian television programs and reporters from across the country descending on Brambati di Sopra. The Gambaresios recognized that the media attention was beneficial for Yara's case, but they nonetheless found the intrusion during such a difficult time almost unbearable. Over the next 3 months, the numerous investigators working on Yara's case pursued every possible lead, verified every sighting, and interviewed all potential suspects. Mora and Fulvio clung to the hope that their beautiful young daughter was alive somewhere and would be returned to them. Tragically, that hope was shattered on February 26, 2011, 3 months after she was last seen. Lario Scotti was flying his model airplane in a town 6 miles, or 10 kilometers, south of Brambati di Sopra. He had chosen a secluded area away from public spaces and over an expanse of scrubland to test his new toy. Hilario encountered some issues with the device, causing him to land it in an overgrown section of shrubs and weeds. He walked over to retrieve the plane, and as he stood back up, something caught his eye. It appeared to be a piece of fabric lying on the ground. His first thought was that someone had discarded clothing there. But then, Hilario noticed a pair of shoes. Upon closer examination, he discovered human remains. Although the body had clearly been in that location for an extended period, a few items of clothing stood out: a black jacket and a Hello Kitty sweatshirt, the same garments Yara had been wearing when last seen. Further analysis of the scene uncovered Yara's iPod and house keys. Her SIM card and phone battery were also recovered, but her cell phone was missing. The autopsy was conducted by Professor Cristina Cattaneo, one of Italy's most renowned forensic pathologists. Traces of lime were found in Yara's nose and airways, and rope fibers were discovered on her clothing. These findings suggested that the perpetrator might have been a builder or someone involved in the construction trade. Yara's body bore multiple cuts from a sharp object. The most tragic discovery was that she had died due to exposure, not directly from her injuries. 2 DNA samples were collected at the scene, one from Yara's gloves and the other from her phone battery. These samples were run against the national database, but neither matched any recorded individuals. All recovered items, including Yara's clothing, were sent for further investigation. This process led to the discovery of a third DNA profile 2 months later on Yara's underwear. Authorities believe a struggle had occurred, and the perpetrator had injured himself, leaving behind DNA. The suspect was designated ignoto, 1, meaning unknown one. The next step was to identify the source of this DNA. Investigators ordered DNA samples from everyone close to Yara, including family members, friends, and locals frequenting areas she visited. Other officers were tasked with cross-referencing phone records from devices that had moved through Brambati di Sopra and the town where Yara's body was discovered. When a number was located, the owner was tracked down and asked to provide a DNA sample. This painstaking work required hundreds of hours combing through data and attempting to link faces to the numbers. Each new sample took several hours to analyze and generate a profile, with multiple geneticists across Italy working overtime to log the information. The search for Yara, and the subsequent efforts to track down her perpetrator, became one of the largest and most expensive manhunts in Italy's history. Yara was finally laid to rest at the end of May 2011. In the months following the discovery of her body, thousands of DNA samples were analyzed, yet there was still no match for unknown one. Letizia Ruggieri decided to explore another angle. She understood that many perpetrators tend to dispose of their victims in areas with which they are familiar. Near the location where Yara's body was found, there was a nightclub. Recognizing it as a long shot, Letizia ordered officers to collect DNA samples from club patrons on busy Friday and Saturday nights. This is how Damiano Gerononi came into focus. Damiano was a frequent attendee at the nightclub, and his DNA showed a striking resemblance to unknown one. However, he had a solid alibi, having been in South America at the time Yara disappeared. Nevertheless, authorities pursued the lead, and geneticists suspected that unknown one was a relative of Damiano Gerononi. Every member of the Gerononi family was scrutinized, and a surprising connection to the Gambaresios emerged. Damiano's mother, Aurora, had worked for the family as a domestic helper for 10 years. Aurora lived near Yara's home and had visited twice a week while Yara was growing up. Yara and Aurora were close. Aurora always ensured Yara behaved properly, and Yara delighted in showing her new gymnastics moves. Although Aurora had stopped working for Fulvio and Mora, she maintained a positive relationship with the family. Imagine her shock when she suddenly became the focus of the investigation. "It was the worst thing that could happen to me," Aurora later admitted. Both Aurora and her son Damiano were thoroughly questioned. Their phone calls were monitored, and they were placed under surveillance. After months of trying to find any link between either of them and Yara's disappearance, Letizia eventually resigned herself to the conclusion that, in the end, this was nothing more than a sick coincidence. At the one-year anniversary of Yara's death, pressure on authorities to bring her killer to justice was reaching a breaking point. Various politicians criticized Letizia, questioning her competence as magistrate, despite her having conducted a textbook investigation from the start. Nevertheless, she refused to let this background noise distract her from solving Yara's case and doubled down on the only viable lead so far, Damiano's DNA profile. Investigators focused on constructing an extensive family tree of those related to Damiano, cataloging hundreds of names. Relatives were traced as far back as 1815, resulting in an immense and detailed family tree. This work led investigators to the quiet village of Gorno, where the same families had lived for generations, including the Gerinonis. Damiano's uncle Giuseppe had passed away in 1999, and investigators hoped to obtain a DNA sample from him. In September 2011, they visited his widow, Laura, who was able to provide 2 stamps that her late husband had licked. Analysis revealed that unknown one was likely Giuseppe's son, making him Damiano's first cousin. Giuseppe had worked as a bus driver and was a talented accordion player, performing at Gorno festivals. He had 3 children with Laura, 2 sons and a daughter. When their DNA was compared to unknown one, neither child proved a perfect match. Since none of them had children, investigators reasoned that Giuseppe must have had another son, one unknown to them and not with Laura. Letizia described this as an investigation within an investigation. The question then became, how could they track down Giuseppe's illegitimate son? Through examining Giuseppe's personal life, investigators learned that he had visited a resort called Solace Term every May from the early 1960s, a tradition he maintained without his wife Laura. During the spring months of 2012, authorities scrutinized the records of Solace Term, tracking down women whose stays at the resort had overlapped with Giuseppe's visits. The effort proved fruitless, as did searching through orphanage records and women's shelters. They came to the conclusion that the possible woman they were searching for was most likely married. Divorce in Italy had been illegal until 1970, so even if the mystery woman had an affair with Giuseppe, she likely stayed married. During this time, Yara's parents had hired a freelance geneticist, Giorgio Portera, to look over the investigation and explain to them, in layman's terms, what everything meant. After reviewing the information, Giorgio campaigned for Giuseppe's body to be exhumed so a proper DNA analysis could be performed. The DNA taken from the stamp could only compare part of unknown one's DNA sequence. His wish was granted on March 7, 2013, when Giuseppe's body was exhumed. This effort confirmed that, without a shadow of a doubt, Giuseppe was unknown one's father. He did have a son out there who was responsible for Yara's passing. The authorities kept details of the information private for the most part, much to the frustration of the media desperate for a story. Slowly, rumors started to spread about Giuseppe's illegitimate son, who was believed to have taken Yara's life. As an array of journalists started their own investigation, many affairs and family secrets were uncovered. Things began playing out like a soap opera in the small towns, but a breakthrough was on the horizon. Marshal Giovanni Maccherino worked closely with Letizia. He worked in an office alongside her own. Marshal was a well-liked man with a stubborn streak, by his own admittance. Yara's case had caused him many sleepless nights and 4 years with no breaks, working towards bringing the man responsible to justice. In stark contrast to the high-tech work that went into analyzing the DNA samples and tracking phone records, Marshall was more old school. He liked getting out into the community and talking to people, making them feel comfortable by talking face to face. Through this, Marshall found out many details of Giuseppe's life. As previously mentioned, Giuseppe worked as a bus driver, and Marshall managed to track down his old colleagues. The main bus route for the drivers was taking factory workers to the abundant textile factories in the area. Many of these passengers were women. The drivers often described Giuseppe as somewhat of a ladies' man. While Marshall became acquainted with every aspect of Giuseppe's life, a name came up: Esther Ruffi. Esther was born and raised in Ponte Selva, where Giuseppe lived since the early 1960s. Giuseppe actually lived not far from Esther at the time. When she was 19 years old, Esther got married and moved to a nearby village. She worked at a textile mill and would take the bus daily to her job. This is how Esther met Giuseppe. Her husband was a sickly man who used a cane, and during her frequent trips in Giuseppe's bus, Esther fell in love. Did investigators finally have their missing link? Letitia and her team checked their database to see if Esther happened to be on file. They found that a sample had been taken from Esther back in 2012, but a lab error meant it was not showing on the system. The result was conclusive when the moment came to run Esther's DNA against Unknown One. Unknown One was Esther's son. Had her sample been correctly logged in the first place, this very well may have come to light 2 years earlier. Esther left the home with her husband, and they moved back to Ponte Selva in 1970. The couple welcomed twins that same year, a boy and a girl. The little boy was named Massimo. In 2014, Massimo Bassetti was 44 years old and married with children. The family lived together in Mapello, the same town where Yara's cell phone had last pinged. Once Letizia had a name, she wasted no time tracking down Bassetti and obtaining a DNA sample to compare against Unknown One. This would serve as the final piece of the puzzle if it confirmed that his DNA matched what was found on Yara's body. Knowing that directly asking Bassetti for a sample might raise suspicion, the team devised a clever plan. First, however, they needed to locate him. Bassetti was observed for several days, during which investigators learned he maintained a fairly consistent routine. He worked in construction and returned home each evening at the same time in his small truck. On the surface, Bassetti appeared like any other family man. After confirming his routine and vehicle, the plan was set in motion. While Bassetti was out driving, an officer pulled him over, explaining that they were conducting breathalyzer tests to catch drivers over the legal limit. Bassetti was asked to blow into the device. He chuckled at first and said, "I do not drink." The officer persisted, and Bassetti completed the test. The officer then pretended the device was faulty and asked him to use a second one. It confirmed he had not been drinking that day, and he was free to leave. As he drove off, the officer jogged back to his car with 2 high-quality DNA samples from the prime suspect. The samples were sent immediately to the lab, and by early afternoon, authorities had their answer. Massimo Bassetti was Unknown One. On June 16, 2014, Bassetti was arrested and charged with taking Yara Gambarazio's life. Investigators found that Bassetti frequented areas near Yara's home. He often ate at a nearby pizzeria, parked behind the gym where Yara practiced gymnastics, and visited a local tanning shop regularly. His internet searches revealed a disturbing interest in teenage girls, and phone records placed him in Brambati di Sopra on the day Yara disappeared. Bassetti deliberately turned off his phone at 5:45 p.m., only turning it back on the following morning. When questioned, he remained silent and maintained his innocence. His legal team challenged the DNA evidence, arguing that while it could show he had contact with Yara, it did not prove he was responsible for her death. The trial began in mid-2015 and lasted a full year, revealing the immense scope of the investigation, which had analyzed over 18,000 DNA samples. After numerous witnesses testified and dozens of pieces of evidence were presented, the Court of Bergamo, overseen by Judge Antonella Pertogia, delivered its verdict on July 1, 2016. Bassetti was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Yara's case is notable for many reasons. Her loss profoundly affected her family, but the investigation into the monster who took her also disrupted multiple other families. Giuseppe's widow had to come to terms with the fact that her husband had been unfaithful and that his son was responsible for this horrific crime. Bassetti's mother and sister also had to live with the consequences of his actions, alongside other scandals revealed during the investigation. Yet, the most devastating loss remains that of Yara Gambarazio, the bright young girl whose life was cruelly taken. The exact details of that night remain unclear, as Bassetti continues to claim his innocence. Perhaps one day, the full truth will emerge. Moving on to the next case. Oakley Carlson. Oakley Carlson's life began on December 6, 2016, in Oakville, Washington, yet her childhood was anything but typical. She belonged to a household that faced numerous hardships. Her parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carson, endured their own share of difficulties. Andrew once briefly worked as a police officer, but he was dismissed for misconduct, though it never resulted in criminal charges. In contrast, Jordan's past was overshadowed by serious drug and theft-related crimes, and both struggled with substance abuse. Since 2013, their family had been under observation following multiple complaints regarding how they were raising their children. In August 2017, Jordan launched a crowdfunding campaign in an attempt to secure funds for legal representation. Child Protective Services had removed their children after a report indicated they had failed to provide proper medical treatment for one of their daughters, who suffered from health complications that hindered her growth and weight. During that same time frame, 8-month-old Oakley was placed in the care of Eric and Jamie Jo Hiles. The Hiles were compassionate school teachers who deeply wished to become parents. Their path to fostering Oakley started when a former student of theirs told them that the granddaughter of his hairdresser required a foster placement and would eventually be eligible for adoption. He encouraged them to provide a nurturing home, and they accepted with full commitment. As Oakley grew older, she blossomed into a cheerful child who loved making everyone around her smile. Her love for dancing led to her enrollment in dance lessons. She also had a remarkable gift for memorizing stories and was exceptionally intelligent, radiating warmth in the Hiles household. Jamie and Eric were always truthful with Oakley, explaining that while she had not come from Jamie's belly, she had come from her heart. The couple adored her profoundly and longed to adopt her. Yet in October 2019, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families made the tough choice that Oakley should return to her biological family. Despite the Hiles' worries, in November 2019, just a week before her 3rd birthday, Oakley said goodbye to Jamie and Eric, going back to live with Jordan, Andrew, and her siblings. Jamie later revealed in an interview the heartbreaking ordeal of parting with Oakley on the day before Thanksgiving dinner. It was a sorrowful farewell, filled with uncertainty about whether they would ever have the chance to see her again. They continued to stay alert regarding Oakley's welfare, as they carried lingering doubts about Jordan and Andrew's ability to provide care and protection. Sadly, the worries of Oakley's foster parents were not without cause. In 2020, Oakley spent Christmas with her paternal grandparents, who were gravely troubled by her condition. She had developed visible dark circles beneath her eyes, sores on her face, and looked pale and bruised, raising fears for her health and safety. The grandparents contacted Child Protective Services, but it appeared their report merely sparked a serious family conflict. After that troubling episode, Andrew's parents had no more contact with Oakley or her parents. Almost a year afterward, on November 6, 2021, shortly before 5 p.m., Andrew phoned the authorities to report a fire at their home that had occurred earlier that day. According to his version, Oakley had accidentally ignited the sofa while playing with a lighter. Andrew stated that he and his wife had fought the flames for 4 hours, but despite their determined efforts, the fire spread to the 2nd floor of their house. This aroused suspicion among firefighters, largely because of the long delay between when the fire began and when it was reported. Andrew explained the delay by saying the situation was chaotic, as neither he nor his wife could find their cell phones to call for help. Because of the contradictions in the details given, authorities initiated an in-depth investigation into the matter. Their results showed that the fire had actually started in the microwave, contradicting the original claim that the sofa was the cause of the blaze. Following the fire, a close friend of the Stanleys set up an online fundraiser, stating that the blaze had destroyed the upper level of their home, causing them to lose most of their possessions. Several days later, Jessica, the local school director, whose daughter was a friend of one of the Carlson girls, decided to visit the family. They were then staying in an inn, and she intended to bring supplies and offer support. When she arrived, she instantly noticed Oakley's absence and asked where she was. She was told that Oakley was grounded. Afterward, she sent a colleague from school to deliver more supplies, but that visit lasted only about 5 minutes. The colleague grew increasingly uneasy because Oakley was still not with her siblings that day. Becoming more alarmed over the puzzling absence of the child, Jessica took advantage of a visit from Oakley's younger sister, who was spending the night at her home, to carefully ask about Oakley's whereabouts. To her astonishment, the 6-year-old responded with clear irritation, declaring that Oakley did not exist anymore and had been taken in by her adoptive parents. This shocking disclosure compelled Jessica to act without delay. She immediately reached out to the County Child Protective Services office, voicing her serious concern for Oakley's safety and requesting a welfare check to verify the child's condition. On December 6, 2021, officials carried out a visit to the hotel where Oakley's family had been residing after the fire, aiming to evaluate the circumstances surrounding the missing child. Jordan met them at the door, carrying a 2-year-old in her arms, and mentioned that the family was in the midst of packing. The conversation that followed was filled with troubling indications. When asked about Oakley's location, Jordan answered that Oakley was with her foster mother. The officer pressed her to verify whether she was in fact the child's mother, and she confirmed that she was. Yet when questioned again about her daughter's whereabouts, Jordan turned away and attempted to get confirmation from another person inside the room on whether the child was with her foster parents. At that moment, the officer called Andrew over to the doorway and asked him the same question about his daughter's location. He responded that Oakley was staying with his parents, meaning the child's grandparents, but confessed he did not have their phone number or address. Eventually, he gave this vital information to the police. According to official records, the officers contacted Andrew's father, who revealed that they had not seen their granddaughter since December 2020, when she had spent Christmas with them. The authorities then went to the grandparents' home in person, confirming that the child was indeed not there. With their investigative options diminishing, they reached out to social services staff to ask if the child was in foster care. However, officials stated that the child was supposed to be with her biological parents. When they returned to the Carlson's hotel room, the officers informed Andrew that the child was not with his parents. Instead of showing worry, he seemed strangely detached, as though he already knew the information they had just provided. Jordan's reaction, though different, was equally puzzling. She burst out in anger, clenched her fists tightly, and announced she would not answer their questions before quickly retreating into the room. To the authorities, it was becoming more evident that the Carlsons were concealing something. Heightening their suspicions was an unusual detail noted about the family's vehicle parked at the hotel. There was just one child safety seat, despite the fact that they were supposed to have 4 children, all under the age of 10. That same day, at around 2 p.m., Jessica, the school director, contacted the police to report a strange incident. Jordan had called the school during regular school hours, citing an emergency and expressing the need to pick up her 6-year-old daughter. Acting on the cautionary side, the authorities promptly instructed the school not to release the child to her parents. However, the warning turned out to be unnecessary as Jordan and Andrew failed to show up at the school. Approximately an hour and a half after the call, 32-year-old Jordan and 36-year-old Andrew departed the hotel with their 2-year-old child, but their departure did not go unnoticed. Both of them were arrested for obstruction as they adamantly refused to cooperate with the ongoing investigation. Simultaneously, on the same day, the police made a public appeal on social media seeking assistance from the community to help locate Oakley. According to a report from a local newspaper, this marked a turning point as Child Protective Services assumed custody of the 2- and 6-year-old children. As for the 9-year-old, the identity of the guardian who assumed custody remained undisclosed. The family's residence and property underwent a thorough examination with detectives from the county police and the FBI working together. Despite their meticulous search of the house, they found no sign of the missing girl or any evidence suggesting she had been living there recently. What stood out was that while all her siblings had designated bedrooms, there was no indication of a room for Oakley, and her clothing and toys were noticeably absent. A significant discovery for the ongoing investigation was the presence of bloodstains on the blinds, the front door, and a handprint on one of the walls. On December 6th, Andrew and Jordan found themselves in the county jail, each with a bond set at $150,000 and a 72-hour hold, all due to suspicions of involuntary manslaughter. However, as the investigations progressed, additional charges were brought against them in the following days. They now faced allegations of second-degree abandonment of a dependent person. This new charge stemmed from the authorities' discovery that for approximately 15 months, the couple had failed to provide their 6-year-old daughter with the prescribed medical treatment, resulting in a severe decline in her health that posed a risk of death. The police clarified that this was the sole charge that would keep them detained, and the bond remained in effect. Oakley's paternal grandparents issued a statement emphasizing their full cooperation with the investigation and their singular objective to locate their missing granddaughter. They also shared their prayers for the child's safe return and expressed gratitude for all those diligently working to find her. On December 13th of the same year, the search efforts officially concluded. Law enforcement authorities reported extensive searches that covered over 300 acres, scoring for any trace of the vanished child. The police affirmed that every inch of land had been meticulously examined, leaving no stone unturned. However, he underlined that the quest for truth regarding the fate of the little girl was far from over. Despite the parents' claims of having seen the child as recently as November 30th, they were unable to provide any concrete information about her whereabouts or her current condition. Their inability to confirm whether the child was under the care of an adult further compounded the mystery. Yet, considering all the gathered evidence, detectives established a troubling timeline. Oakley had not been seen alive since January 27, 2021. It led them to a grim conclusion that the child couldn't possibly have survived on her own for such an extended period. Given these revelations, authorities issued a heartfelt plea to anyone who may have come into contact with Oakley since January 2021 or had interactions with her parents during that time to step forward with any information they might possess. Furthermore, court documents unveiled disturbing testimonies from Oakley's own siblings, who held the grim belief that their sister was no longer among the living. The eldest among them disclosed that their mother had strictly forbidden any discussion about Oakley. They recounted a tragic narrative in which Oakley had supposedly accidentally started a house fire using their mother's lighter, leading to physical abuse and her confinement in a cell beneath the stairs as a form of punishment. Their mother had allegedly told them that Oakley had ventured into the woods and met a tragic fate at the jaws of wolves. Another sibling recalled incidents where Jordan had used a belt to discipline Oakley and had locked her in a closet, expressing deep concerns about their sister's well-being and a haunting fear that she might have succumbed to starvation. Based on the available information, authorities were unable to determine whether Oakley was still alive before the house fire. It's worth noting that legal documents reveal the troubling history. Since 2013, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families had received a total of 11 records related to the Carlsons. Among these, 8 were closely examined in light of allegations involving domestic violence, physical abuse, parental drug use, and medical neglect. In February 2022, a significant development unfolded in the case against Jordan and Andrew. This time, they faced fresh charges for endangering their children by exposing them to a controlled substance. This shocking turn of events stemmed from the alarming discovery of dangerously high levels of methamphetamine in the bodies of 2 of their children. A month later, on March 14th, it was reported in the media that Andrew had pleaded guilty to separate charges of endangering 2 of his children with drugs. Unfortunately, his guilty plea did not yield any information that could shed light on the circumstances surrounding Oakley's disappearance. It was also announced at that time that Andrew would face sentencing at the end of March, with the maximum penalty being 12 months of imprisonment. In response to these developments, concerned citizens gathered near county jail, demanding that the Carlsons reveal the fate of their daughter. The protesters raised their voices, labeling Jordan as a monster rather than a mother. Among the demonstrators stood Oakley's foster mother, who expressed her dissatisfaction with the potential 1-year sentence for the biological father, emphasizing that the children's trauma would extend far beyond that period. As planned, Andrew's sentencing hearing unfolded on March 28th, conducted through a video call. The judge delivered a 12-month sentence for endangering the minors. While pronouncing the verdict, the judge directed her words toward the defendant, highlighting the fundamental duty of a parent to protect their children, a duty he had evidently failed to fulfill. Moreover, the judge imposed several restrictions on Andrew. These restrictions included a prohibition on consuming controlled substances. Additionally, he was mandated to undergo a chemical dependency assessment within 45 days of his release, follow a recommended treatment, and provide proof of compliance to the court for the subsequent 6 months following his release from prison. In early April 2022, shortly after Andrew's sentencing, Jordan also entered a guilty plea. She admitted guilt on the 2 charges of exposing her children to contact with a controlled substance. Consequently, on April 22nd, she received a 20-month prison sentence. Moreover, she was subject to a restriction that prevented her from having any contact with minors under the age of 18 without proper supervision. However, in January 2023, soon after her release following her sentence connected to two of her children, Jordan once again encountered legal trouble. This time, she was taken into custody for fraud and identity theft. Authorities disclosed that she had illegally obtained 4 credit cards using personal details belonging to friends and relatives. Strikingly, 3 of these unlawfully acquired cards were found clogging a toilet in the hotel room where the couple had stayed after their house fire. It was further revealed that Jordan had spent more than $40,000 with these cards, making purchases at Walmart and eBay, as well as withdrawing cash to gamble at a casino. Jordan ultimately entered a guilty plea agreement. At first, she faced a 36-month sentence, but the judge, using discretion, chose to issue a longer term. As a result, Jordan received a sentence of 43 months in jail. In the meantime, Oakley's foster parents have stayed deeply involved in their tireless efforts to find the missing child. They have consistently voiced their anguish and frustration, insisting that the decision to return the girl to her biological parents was rushed and endangered the child's safety, since Andrew and Jordan were considered unfit, both mentally and physically, to raise her. Oakley's disappearance left a profound effect on the public, sparking widespread concern and sympathy. The local community not only worked together with law enforcement, but also gathered in front of the county courthouse on several occasions, demanding justice. Additionally, an online petition was initiated in December 2021, gathering more than 7,000 signatures. The petition aimed to promote a support system designed to protect children returning to their families after leaving the foster care system. It also demanded mandatory long-term drug testing for families reuniting with their children. This petition later developed into a bill called the Oakley Law. Although reports in February 2023 indicated that the bill had faced difficulties in the Washington state legislature, it did elicit responses from representatives of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in the state. These representatives agreed to participate in conversations concerning policy and budget options, demonstrating an ongoing commitment to addressing essential child welfare concerns. The fate of Oakley continues to remain a mystery, posing a baffling challenge for investigators. Their most credible scenario suggests that the young girl may have met a tragic end. However, since her disappearance, a disturbing theory has surfaced that Jordan may have sold her. The investigation has wrestled with an overwhelming flow of leads, which has been one of its most difficult aspects since the very beginning. County police have been flooded with reports from across the nation, each alleging possible sightings of the missing child. They have worked tirelessly with law enforcement agencies throughout the United States, carefully scrutinizing every lead. Regrettably, none of these leads produced any information about Oakley's location. Another significant obstacle encountered by investigators was the lack of a definite timeline identifying when the girl had gone missing. To build such a timeline, they had to carefully reconstruct who had interacted with Jordan, Andrew, and Oakley during the months prior to her disappearance. This effort required locating family members, school staff, and reviewing surveillance footage from different stores. The investigators admitted it would have been relatively simple if they were working with a family or group of individuals who followed a consistent and predictable routine. However, in this instance, the family's movements were characterized by irregularity. By the end of this investigation, Oakley's parents still had not disclosed any details about the child's fate, and both continued to be considered suspects in her disappearance. The investigation remains ongoing and active. In their persistent pursuit of answers, the police have offered a reward of $85,000. Moving on to the next case. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. In late March, the quiet town of Yucatan, Kansas was thrust into the spotlight. Two mothers, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. What began as a routine trip ended with their car abandoned along a desolate road, raising more questions than answers. With few leads but growing suspicions, authorities launched an investigation that extended across state lines. As the disappearance escalated into a case of suspected foul play, arrests included an individual closely connected to the personal life of one of the missing women. 27-year-old Veronica Butler, born in 1996 in Oklahoma, primarily grew up in Guyman. She graduated from Yarborough High School in 2015 which was ominously near the location where her abandoned vehicle would later be found. Veronica worked as a nursing assistant and also contributed her time at a local scale house. Engaged to Tracy Peets, a Marine, Veronica was deeply devoted to her two young children from a previous relationship. Jillian Kelly, 39, was originally from Gering, Nebraska, but resided in Yucatan, Kansas with her husband, Heath Kelly, a local minister. Keith had been appointed as a new minister at Willow Christian Church in Indianola, Nebraska in November 2023, but had not yet begun his duties. Serving as secretary of the Yucatan First Christian Church, Jillian was closely involved in her faith and the religious community. As a mother of four, she balanced her professional responsibilities with a demanding home life. Known for her warmth and active engagement in church activities, Jillian was recognized as a steadfast support for others. She mentored peers and was always willing to offer assistance or a listening ear to those in need. One of the individuals she supported was Veronica Butler. Veronica and Jillian were more acquaintances than close friends. Both had been members of the First Christian Church in Yucatan, and their lives intersected through their shared involvement in church activities. Although not extremely close, Jillian served as one of the court-appointed supervisors for visitations between Veronica and her children. At the time, Veronica's children were living with a grandparent in Eva, Oklahoma. On March 30, 2024, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly embarked on what was expected to be an uneventful journey from Yucatan, Kansas to Eva. The purpose of their trip was for Veronica to pick up her two children so they could attend her daughter's 6th birthday party. Her son was 8 years old. This 45-minute drive was one that Veronica, as a devoted mother, regularly made. The day began like any other, with both women preparing for the drive. They departed early, planning to return the same day, as they had on numerous previous occasions. This time, however, unbeknownst to the two mothers, the routine trip would take a sudden and tragic turn. As night fell and neither woman arrived at their destination or returned home, their family and friends grew concerned. This concern triggered a search that quickly escalated into a full investigation by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI. The last confirmed sighting of the two women was when they departed from Yucatan. Phone records indicated that Veronica and Jillian's devices were actively transmitting signals until approximately 9:42 a.m. After that time, the devices were no longer detected by the networks and ceased transmitting. Later that same day, their car was discovered abandoned on a dirt path roughly 1,000 feet off Oklahoma State Highway 95 and Road L. This location is just south of Elkhart, Kansas, not far from Yarborough School, where Veronica had graduated. The school was closed on Monday, April 1st, out of an abundance of caution, and reopened on Tuesday, but remained on lockdown due to the uncertain nature of the missing persons case. The school's superintendent noted that Butler was part of the class of 2015 and was the only senior that year, meaning she was the sole graduate. The superintendent remarked, "I joked about her being the top of her class, and, well, the bottom also." The location of the incident was remote, an open area that rarely saw activity. The abandoned car was conspicuous to anyone passing by. Inside the vehicle, the scene was disturbing. A small amount of blood was present, suggesting violence. Outside the car, separate puddles of blood were discovered. Whatever had occurred, it happened both inside and outside the vehicle. The car's doors were left open, as if the occupants had been forced out or had departed in haste. Veronica's glasses were found on the roadway near a broken hammer. A pistol magazine was recovered from Jillian's purse at the scene, though no pistol was found. The area around the car was expansive and open, providing no immediate clues or witnesses. This isolation only amplified concerns regarding what might have happened to Veronica and Jillian. Authorities, having deemed the disappearance suspicious from the beginning, intensified their investigative efforts. Search teams combed fields and woodlands. Investigators canvassed the area for any potential leads that might clarify the women's last known movements. As days passed with no sign of Veronica or Jillian, the local communities where the women lived began to rally. Prayer services organized by both the Willow Christian Church and the Yucatan Assembly of God brought residents together in hope and solidarity. Social media pages and community bulletin boards filled with appeals for information related to the case. The Willow Christian Church posted on Facebook, "Please pray that Jillian and her friend Veronica are safe and that they are found quickly. God, Please bring these women home to their families who are so worried about them. Behind the scenes, law enforcement worked tirelessly, piecing together the women's last known activities. Investigators examined the personal and professional relationships of the missing women and followed up on every tip received. The absence of concrete evidence or a clear investigative direction only intensified the frustration and fear experienced by everyone involved. Travis Woodworth, a friend, said, "Not knowing anything, not knowing if they are still in Kansas or in Oklahoma or where they are, it just broke my heart. It has been a very heartbreaking week. Lots of sleepless nights." Jelly Houts, another friend of the missing women, added, "Nothing like this really happens around here. So it was a shock. It was horror of all people." Jelly also mentioned that Veronica lights up a room and always shared a smile, urging that everyone pray for her family and fiancé, Tracy. OSBI spokesperson Hunter McKee emphasized the disturbing nature of the disappearance. He highlighted the rural location of the abandoned car and the complete lack of contact with the women as key factors fueling concerns about foul play. He added, "Usually, you can use cameras and footage to see maybe what occurred or what led up to that." On April 13, 2024, the investigation resulted in the arrest of 4 individuals in connection with Veronica and Jillian's disappearance and presumed deaths. The arrested individuals included 54-year-old Tad Burt Cullum, 50-year-old Tiffany Michelle Adams, 44-year-old Cole Earl Twombly, and 43-year-old Cora Twombly. Eventually, a 5th suspect, Paul Grice, was also taken into custody. Although the women's bodies had not yet been located, the evidence gathered from the scene was crucial in establishing foul play and facilitating the swift arrests of the suspects. Hunter McKee stated, "The evidence discovered inside and around that abandoned vehicle helped our investigators determine that foul play was involved. What was in the vehicle and around it, we cannot discuss." The loved ones had to be restrained from confronting the suspects as they entered the courtroom, marking the first time they had been seen in public since their arrest. The 4 individuals were charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and conspiracy in the deaths of Veronica and Jillian. They were booked into the Texas County Jail. The day following the arrests, on April 14th, in a secluded area of Texas County, Oklahoma, the search for the 2 missing mothers ended with a grim discovery. Authorities, including the OSBI, the FBI, and the Texas County Sheriff's Department, announced that they had located 2 bodies. The remains were transported to the office of the Oklahoma Chief Medical Examiner for investigation and autopsies. Officials confirmed that all children involved were safe. It remains unclear where the children were at the time of the killings. The investigation into Veronica and Jillian's disappearance led authorities to a rural property less than 10 miles from where the women were last seen. This site became a focal point after investigators uncovered evidence linking the suspects to the area. According to court documents, 2 burner phones associated with the suspects had pinged near a recently disturbed plot of land on the property. A hole had apparently been dug, then refilled and discreetly covered with hay. Property owner Jamie Beasley provided chilling details to investigators. He described his interactions with Tad Burt Cullum, one of the arrested suspects. Cullum had allegedly requested to use a skid steer for what he harmlessly described as dirt work to bury concrete. Just 2 days before Veronica and Jillian disappeared, Cullum had approached Beasley to ask about using the heavy machinery to remove a stump and participate in other digging activities. Following the women's disappearance, Cullum, feeling the pressure of the investigation, warned Beasley that law enforcement considered him a person of interest. He noted that the skid steer tracks might appear suspicious. Jamie was advised by Cullum to simply claim that the suspect had been performing general land maintenance if questioned. As the investigation progressed and officials began piecing together not only the who and how behind the crime, but also the method, they uncovered a detail that would shock the entire community. One of the suspects had a surprisingly close connection to Veronica Butler. Tiffany Adams was Veronica's mother-in-law, making her a relative by marriage and the grandmother of Veronica's children, the same grandmother with whom the children were staying in Eva. During the investigation, Adams told the OSBI that on March 29th, her son and her grandchildren had spent the night elsewhere. She had planned to pick them up the following morning prior to meeting Veronica. Court documents indicate that Adams contacted Veronica at 9 a.m. on March 30th to confirm their appointment. According to Adams, Veronica told her she would not make it because something came up. Phone records confirm the conversation occurred, But at that time, Veronica was actually on her way to pick up Jillian. Wrangler Rickman, the father of Veronica's 2 children, had legal custody but was in a rehabilitation facility at the time, meaning the children were residing with Adams at the time of the disappearance. The potential motive in the case appeared linked to the ongoing custody battle over Veronica's children, which began in February 2019. The contentious legal dispute involved frequent court appearances and critical hearings, highlighting the high stakes for all parties involved. 10 days before Veronica went missing, she filed for increased visitation and was seeking full custody. An upcoming court hearing on April 17th had the potential to grant Veronica unsupervised visitation rights. The OSBI interviewed the person who normally supervises the visits, who stated she was available to supervise that day, but Adams told her to take a couple of weeks off from visitation. Adams wanted to question her grandchildren about how Veronica's approved visitation supervisors were. Tiffany Adams sometimes resisted handing over the children to her own son, despite his legal custody rights. The fact that law enforcement has also been called to intervene in the custody issues was a clear indication that there was a volatile family dynamic. Recordings also indicated that Adams and her boyfriend, Tad Cullum, who was also one of the 4 suspects arrested, had made threats against Wrangler. Wrangler's grandmother reported in February 2024, he told her they did not have to worry about the custody battle much longer because Adams had it under control. Adams knew the path the judge walked to work, and we will take out Veronica at drop-off. Wrangler was confirmed to be in a rehabilitation facility in Oklahoma City at the time of the disappearance. After obtaining a search warrant for Adams' phone on April 1st, OSBI agents discovered searches related to tasers, gun shops, repaid phones, and methods to lure someone from their home. A search of local gun shops showed Adams had purchased 5 stun guns on March 23rd and 3 prepaid cell phones from Walmart. The cell phones were traced to areas significant to the investigation, including where Veronica's car was found and their last known location. On March 30th, between 1016 and 10:35 a.m., 2 of these phones were tracked to a remote pasture where evidence of recent soil disturbance was apparent. A buried hole covered with hay was found roughly 8.5 miles from Veronica and Jillian's last known spot, within a time frame consistent with the disappearance of the 2 mothers. All the suspects belonged to an anti-government group called God's Misfits that regularly met at the Twombly's home. On March 30th, their 16-year-old daughter noticed that Cora and Cole Twombly were not home, but returned around noon. They had allegedly taken a blue and gray Chevrolet pickup truck. After returning, they asked their teenage daughter to clean the pickup's interior. She also told investigators that her mother admitted that she and her father had blocked the road to intercept Veronica and Jillian. They then directed them towards where Adams, Cullum, and Grice were waiting. When questioned about why Jillian had to be slain as well, Cora justified it by saying Jillian was not innocent because she supported Veronica. When asked if the bodies were hidden in a well, Cora's cryptic reply was something like that. Their daughter also talked about earlier attempts to take Veronica Butler's life around Yugurton. In February 2024, these attempts included a strategy to lure Veronica Butler outside, a tactic mirrored by the web search found on Adams' phone. Cora also described a plan to simulate an accident by dropping an anvil through Butler's windshield. Such incidents commonly occurred when driving past work vehicles. Prosecutors say there had been many attempts to take Veronica's life. Other court documents show the years of turmoil between Veronica and Adams. Efforts to secure a protection order did not get a judge's approval. KSN spoke with Clinton Butler, Veronica's father. When asked if he felt the justice system failed his daughter, he responded, 100%. A celebration of life service was held for Jillian on April 28th, and for Veronica on May 3rd. Grice, 31, made his first court appearance in Texas County, Oklahoma on May 1, 2024. It is unclear why the police did not arrest Grice when the others were arrested. His arrest came 9 days later. He admitted that he was a part of the planning, slaying, and burial of Veronica and Jillian. During the hearing, he was denied bail. According to the motion, were 3 reasons involved in the decision. Proof of guilt is evident. Violent offenses are believed to have happened, and he is facing a maximum sentence of life or life without parole. He will get a public defender since he said he cannot afford to hire his own. According to Adams's affidavit, she also did provide a recorded statement to law enforcement, indicating her responsibility for the slaying of the deceased. Veronica and Jillian were more than victims in a sensational case. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, and loved ones. This case serves as a reminder of the devastating impact that crime has on victims and their families, going far beyond the headlines in courtrooms. For the public and the loved ones of the victims, the wait for the trial and its outcome can be an agonizing period filled with uncertainty. As the legal process unfolds, they must grapple with the slow pace of judicial proceedings. It can often feel frustratingly sluggish compared to the immediate impact and emotional upheaval caused by the crime. The hope for all is that justice for Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly will be served. There is an effort in Kansas to make sure the names of Veronica and Jillian are not forgotten. Hamlin and Beth Beard are the co-owners of Maine Revelation, a small business in Yucatan which is selling T-shirts. This is an effort to help the families of Veronica and Jillian. The T-shirts feature Jillian's favorite Bible verse on the back. All of the money they get will go to the victims' families. Rice is expected to return to the courthouse on May 15th with the other 4 people who have been arrested and charged in connection to this case. For 2 decades, the community of Ormond Beach, Florida was haunted by the unsolved disappearance of Autumn Lane McClure. A 16-year-old vanished in May 2004, leaving behind a trail of questions and a family desperate for answers. Initially characterized as a missing persons case, the investigation took a dark turn as new evidence surfaced years later, pointing to foul play. Autumn Lane McClure was a bright and energetic 16-year-old high school student from Ormond Beach, known for her vibrant personality and warm smile, attended Mainland High School, and lived with her grandmother. Working part-time at a local grocery store, Winn-Dixie, she was a familiar face to many in her community before her mysterious disappearance. On May 10, 2004, Autumn's grandmother reported her missing after Autumn's boyfriend said he dropped her off at the Volusia County Mall. In the early stages of the investigation, her grandmother received several letters and phone calls, allegedly from Autumn. The letters claimed she was fine and would return home after she turned 18, but Autumn was never seen or heard from again. Initial investigations focused on retracing Autumn's last known movements and interviewing close acquaintances. This included her boyfriend, who was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Despite efforts to locate Autumn, no significant leads or evidence surfaced that could explain what had happened to her. Autumn's grandmother, who had been her primary caregiver, became a central figure in keeping the case in the public eye. As the years passed, the investigation into Autumn's disappearance was marked by periods of activity and frustrating lulls. Investigators never ceased their efforts, continuously re-interviewing witnesses, collecting DNA from family members, and following up on new leads. One lead emerged in 2016 when Autumn's former boyfriend, previously believed to have dropped her off at the mall, confessed to investigators that he had actually left her at the Sea Breeze Bridge. From there, she was picked up by her grocery store co-worker, Jessica Freeman. Detectives learned that Autumn had been staying with Jessica and her boyfriend, Brian Donnelly, who was 31 years old at the time. The couple admitted that Autumn had stayed with them temporarily due to alleged problems at home with her grandmother. They provided minimal information that could assist investigators in locating Autumn, claiming ignorance. Interviews with Jessica in 2018, while she was living in Nevada, yielded no new information. She continued to deny any knowledge of Autumn's fate. It was not until several years later that the case experienced a significant breakthrough. In 2021, authorities received a crucial tip that would reopen the case with new momentum. Chris Miller, a relative of Jessica and Brian, came forward claiming that one or both of them had been involved in the death of a teenage girl in Volusia County. This tip revitalized the investigation and led to a controlled call orchestrated by the police. During the controlled call, Jessica admitted that she had witnessed Brian Donnelly take Autumn's life. Donnelly died during a medical procedure on May 26, 2022, without facing charges. Following his death, detectives re-interviewed Jessica, who had been granted immunity by prosecutors. After securing her immunity deal, she confessed that Autumn had been living with her and Donnelly in the Shady Oaks mobile home park. Autumn had been involved in an inappropriate and intimate relationship with them prior to her disappearance. Jessica further told investigators that she had seen Donnelly choking Autumn in the trailer's bathroom, but by the time she intervened, Autumn was already lifeless. He then threatened Jessica, warning that she would face the same consequences if she went to the police. Authorities stated that they believed the motive was Autumn's plan to return home, and Donnelly feared that if she went back and revealed their relationship, he would face criminal charges. Jessica also provided investigators with critical information regarding the location where Autumn's body had been buried. She identified the site as the 1300 block of Hand Avenue in Ormond Beach. She recalled that Brian Donnelly had returned to the property in late 2021 or early 2022 and appeared satisfied to see that a new home was being built over the area where he had allegedly concealed Autumn's body. In 2023, authorities worked with the new owner of a trailer home on the property to conduct an excavation. Using ground-penetrating radar, investigators identified irregularities in the soil beneath where the trailer had been located. 1 to 2 years after her disappearance, in 2024, the meticulous search enabled investigators to recover 99.9% of Autumn's remains. The recovery of her remains has provided a small measure of peace for her twin brother and the rest of her surviving family members, who have endured years of uncertainty and anguish. While the recovery of her remains and Jessica's confession offer long-awaited answers, they also give the family an opportunity to finally mourn and honor Autumn's memory properly. Although traditional justice is unattainable due to Donnelly's prior death, knowing Autumn's fate, as tragic as it was, provides closure on a chapter that has haunted her family for nearly 2 decades. Volusia Sheriff Mike Chitwood stated, "The sad part is he will never face justice in this world for the evil he perpetrated. I am hoping to God that when he takes his last breath, maybe he has a vision of where he was headed." Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.